Hi, PerspectaWeather.com meteorologist Paul Dorian here on Friday, January 17th. Arctic air pushed into the mid-Atlantic region on Thursday, riding in on strong northwesterly winds that gusted past 40 miles per hour, all the way up to near 50 miles per hour or so in some spots. It continues to be windy this morning, Friday morning, and will remain windy throughout much of the day. Not quite as severe as yesterday, but gusts up to 30 to 40 miles per hour, certainly on the table for the I-95 corridor region. This Arctic influx of air, very cold, very dry, and very dense, will play a key role in a very messy weather situation setting up for Saturday for the DC, Philadelphia, New York City corridor. This cold, dry, dense air will be reluctant to give up its ground on Saturday. Many areas of the suburban locations along the I-95 corridor on Saturday and Saturday night will have trouble climbing above the freezing mark. And with a decent amount of precipitation headed our way, that spells trouble. There will be a period of snow in many spots, especially north of the Mason-Dixon line, a period of sleet, freezing rain, and in some areas ultimately plain rain, especially in the big cities themselves like DC. The District of Columbia likely to turn over to above freezing plain rain at some point, and points south and east of there. Philadelphia maybe south and east of there, and even in the immediate New York City metro region likely to get above freezing late tomorrow, early tomorrow night. But in those northern and western suburbs, especially north of the Pennsylvania-Maryland border, it will have a hard time climbing above freezing tomorrow, and again, that spells trouble. Watch out for slick spots on the roadways, and we'll kind of focus in on this snow and ice threat for Saturday. First of all, this is the total precipitation amount forecasted by last night's high-resolution NAM model for this upcoming event. Has nothing to do with snow or ice, just a total liquid equivalent precipitation amounts. If it happened to be all snow, it melts that snow, and whatever's left in the rain gauge is what is predicted here on this particular total precipitation amount forecast map. And the darker blue right here represents a half an inch of liquid equivalent precipitation. So basically from DC to New York City, at least a half an inch of precipitation is coming. This lighter shading represents 3/4 of an inch. So this is the problem right here. We have temperatures that will struggle to get above freezing, especially in the suburban areas right in this region right here, the northern and western suburbs of DC, Philadelphia, New York City, especially north of the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. This particular area will have trouble climbing above freezing, and given this precipitation that's headed our way, that spells trouble. Some accumulations of snow and ice likely, especially north of the Mason-Dixon line to the north and west of the big cities, cutting across from north and west of Philly to east central Pennsylvania, interior, upstate New Jersey, north and west of New York City. It will be difficult to climb above freezing, and again, at least a half an inch of liquid equivalent precipitation on the way. Well, let's focus in on this Arctic air mass that moved in on Thursday and continues to pour into the region this morning. Arctic air comes from a region where there's very little moisture in the air. There is an ocean up there, the Arctic Ocean, but it's mostly covered by ice this time of the year. So Arctic air is generally quite cold and quite dry. And one way you can take a look at how dry an air mass is by looking at the dew point temperature. The dew point is a true measure of the overall humidity level in the atmosphere. The higher the dew point, the higher the moisture content. And in Arctic air, dew points can drop dramatically. I mentioned this yesterday, that the dew points yesterday morning were in the lower 40s in the I-95 corridor region. This morning they're down into the single digits. And this is the forecast map for tomorrow morning, Saturday morning's dew point reading. And look at this, negative values in much of that area I focused in on before, the suburbs of the big cities, single digits all the way down to Philly, and then in the low and middle teens down into the DC area. This is a very dry air mass, and cold, dry air is the most dense type of air. On the opposite side, you have hot and humid air. That is the lightest type of air. baseballs, for example, travel the farthest on a hot and humid summer evening because it's the least dense of the type of air masses you can have, whereas Arctic air is cold and very dry, and that's the heaviest air, and that will be a contributing factor to the problems expected on Saturday. This heavy, dense air at the low levels of the atmosphere will have trouble retreating to the north and east during the day on Saturday, and again, the result will be temperatures that will struggle to climb above freezing, especially in those northern and western suburbs, especially north of the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. Well, let's take a look at the forecast maps from the high-resolution NAM model from 0Z last night. Again, in this type of situation, I like to take a look at the higher resolution models like the NAM as compared with the larger scale, the more synoptic scale models like the GFS, because I think the higher resolution models have a better handle on this cold, dry air mass that is going to be relatively shallow in the lower levels of the atmosphere during the day on Saturday. Hence, the higher resolution model tends to pick up on that a little bit better than the GFS model, for example. Let's focus in again on the temperatures here in the DC to Philadelphia, New York City corridor. What we're looking at are temperatures that are put out at model grid points, not necessarily for DC itself or Philadelphia, but nearby areas. These are all model grid point temperature forecasts, and we're going to move ahead in 3-hour increments beginning with tomorrow morning. And here we go. Tomorrow morning, the temperatures 26 degrees just north of the DC area, 23 just west of Philadelphia, and all the way to 20 degrees north of the New York City metro region. Let's move ahead now through the day tomorrow. And here we go. Notice these temperatures, again, this range right here, staying below freezing. Now we are into the early afternoon, 1 p.m. forecast. 30 degrees now near DC, 24 near Philly, 23 to the north of New York City. And moving ahead all the way into the late afternoon hours, still hovering around freezing in the DC metro region, at or below freezing around Philly, and certainly below freezing up around New York City. And finally, we'll get into early tomorrow night. This is 7 p.m. forecast map of low-level temperatures tomorrow evening, still hovering around freezing in the northern suburbs of D.C., throughout the Philly metro suburban location areas, and north and west of New York City. So this is what spells trouble for tomorrow, the fact that temperatures will remain at or below freezing in many suburban locations with a half an inch at least of liquid equivalent precipitation on the way. Well, one final map I'd like to show before we get a look at the surface forecast maps from the NAM model run last night. This is kind of an atmospheric profile put out by NOAA, a simple graphic that shows the atmospheric profile when you're dealing with all snow, then sleet, then freezing rain, and ultimately plain rain. And basically, because the Arctic air is so cold and dry, it's dense and it is at the lower levels of the atmosphere, and warm air is kind of forced up and over that very cold Arctic air, because again, the warmer air is lighter, so it's forced up and over, at least initially, and the cold air will tend to retreat to the north, but it may take a while. And envision this being the north here and the south here, and warm air first coming up and over that cold air at the surface. When you're in this part of the atmospheric profile, you may have all snow, but if a nose of warmer air, a very shallow layer of warmer air, first moves in aloft, you can be in the sleet zone, and that certainly will be the case in many areas for a while on Saturday into Saturday night. Then when the warmer air becomes a little bit deeper in the upper part of the atmosphere, the snow that falls initially melts and reaches the ground, but the temperature at the surface still be at or below freezing. Hence, you're in this freezing rain zone, and ultimately you get this warmer air that comes aloft at first, but then works its way all the way down to the lower levels of the atmosphere. You get above freezing, and you are in the plain rain zone. So this is kind of a north to south atmospheric profile that many parts of the I-95 corridor will work through tomorrow, from the snow all the way to the rain, as that warm air first is forced aloft, and it'll cause sleet and then freezing rain, and ultimately, when enough warm air moves in at the surface, plain rain. So kind of a graphical representation of what we're going to go through in the I-95 corridor region on Saturday and Saturday night. Well, let's now take a look at the surface forecast maps from last night's Zero-Z NAM model run. Again, a higher resolution model as compared with the GFS model. This is for 7 a.m. Saturday, and initially looks like it'll be cold enough at all levels of the atmosphere, and we just saw that profile a second ago, for snow to break out all the way down to the DC metro region, just to orient us. This is DC right here, Philadelphia in this area right here, New York City here. Initially there'll be a band of snow, and there can be some accumulations with this initial band, especially north of the Mason-Dixon line. Let's move ahead now to 3 hours later. This is 10 a.m. forecast map. There's that initial band of snow. It should arrive in the DC metro region early to mid-morning, and then maybe late morning to early afternoon in Philadelphia. And this air mass is so dry, it'll actually cause somewhat of a delay for the snow to reach the ground. Initially, the snow will actually begin to fall, but it'll evaporate before it actually has a chance to reach the ground because it's so dry. We saw those dew points near zero in many areas north of the Pennsylvania-Maryland border. So you may look at a radar map early tomorrow. It says it's snowing, but the snow is actually not reaching the ground. And until the lower part of the atmosphere moistens up enough, it may take a while for that snow to actually reach the ground. But here's that band of snow by 10 a.m. Let's go out another 3 hours. And here we are now at 1 p.m. tomorrow. The snow has reached Philadelphia and just about into New York City. And look at all the colors here. This purple area now represents sleet. Sleet perhaps down all the way into the DC metro region. And the pink is more or less the freezing rain. And let's go out another 3 hours. And here we go. We transition from snow to sleet to freezing rain down across the DC metro region at this time. And this is now 4 p.m. forecast map. Again, dealing with temperatures at or below freezing at the ground level all the way through much of the day tomorrow in those northern and western suburbs. Still some freezing rain all the way down to the DC metro region. A period of sleet, and sleet obviously can cause some problems on the roadways because it's just little bits of ice falling onto the roadway. So whether they're treated or not, sleet can cause some slick spots, so watch out for that. Still snowing at that particular time up across New York City. And finally, it lightens up in terms of the icing by early tomorrow night. Maybe some plain rain for a while, but the precipitation will actually shut off pretty quickly after dark tomorrow night, especially across DC and Philadelphia. May hang on a little bit longer into the evening hours in New York City. And then overnight tomorrow night it dries out, and Sunday is another windy, cold day, setting up potential for some snow showers. It's another shot of cold air arrives, riding in again on strong northwest winds. So in terms of accumulation, it looks like maybe a coating to an inch or so of snow and ice in the DC metro region, maybe 1 to 3 inches of snow and ice in the Philadelphia area and New York City area as well. Just go a little bit to the north of Philadelphia, let's say in the east central Pennsylvania, up across the interior sections of New Jersey, you could be talking about 5 inches of snow or so. But even in those areas, sleet will become a factor, and ultimately maybe some freezing rain. But certainly in those areas, temperatures will never get above freezing. So again, a coating to an inch or so in DC, maybe 1 to 3 inches around Philadelphia and New York City, and a sharp uptick in that accumulation amount just to the north and west of Philly and New York, let's say Allentown, the Poconos, interior sections of upstate New Jersey. So a messy day coming for the entire corridor from DC to Philadelphia to New York City on Saturday into Saturday night. That's it for now. For PerspectaWeather.com, I'm meteorologist Paul Dorian.